In 1989, in Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government deployed the military to fire upon unarmed students and civilians, abruptly halting the political reforms that had filled millions with hope. This shocking event remains a taboo subject in China, forbidden from open discussion. This is the goddess of democracy, symbolizing the students' aspirations for democracy and freedom at the time. Why did a student movement end in brutal suppression? What exactly happened that year? To understand this, we must begin with the death of Hu Yaobang. On April 15, 1989, Hu Yaobang passed away. Who was Hu Yaobang? He was the former General Secretary of the Communist Party of China and a leading advocate and implementer of China's reform and opening up policies following the Cultural Revolution. University students and citizens in Beijing spontaneously took to the streets to mourn this enlightened leader of the Communist Party, hoping to use the occasion to push for reform and progress in China. The mourning activities gradually evolved into protests and marches. Students demanded the removal of corrupt officials, an end to corruption, and freedom of the press. Tiananmen Square, the symbol of China's highest political authority, became a venue for the country's youth to petition for change. In the 1980s, China had just emerged from the shadow of the Cultural Revolution. The reform and opening up policies brought economic development and a more tolerant culture. It was an era of spiritual freedom and prosperity. In this relatively relaxed political environment, reform of the political system was also on the agenda. It was time for those in power to step down and make way for change. Many believed that political reform should precede economic reform. They shared a common wish to carry on the legacy of Comrade Hu Yaobang, raising the banner of democracy and science. What was happening in other communist countries around the world at that time? The Soviet Union's General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev, was vigorously promoting economic reform and market openness. The public was allowed to participate in discussions about national affairs. In Poland, solidarity had already gained legal status. Protests and marches swept through other socialist countries. This international environment emboldened Chinese students who were protesting and made conservative factions within the Chinese Communist Party uneasy. Currently, China lacks democracy, particularly democracy. Do you think the world's media presents a true picture, or is it propaganda? Yes, some parts are propaganda. On April 22nd, Hu Yaobang's funeral was held at the Great Hall of the People. Outside the East Gate, 3 student representatives knelt on the steps for an extended period, petitioning for a dialogue with Premier Li Peng and requesting that Hu Yaobang's legacy be honored. However, this petition went unanswered, further fueling student discontent. On April 26, the People's Daily published an article titled, "It is necessary to clearly oppose turmoil," known as the April 26 editorial, which was seen as instigating the unrest. At the time, the Chinese people had just emerged from the decade-long devastation of the Cultural Revolution, and the political implications of the term turmoil made it unacceptable to them. Big character posters condemning the April 26 editorial covered university campuses across China. Those who had planned to leave Tiananmen Square were once again incensed. On April 27, tens of thousands of students from numerous Beijing universities took to the streets and marched towards Tiananmen Square. The scale was unprecedented. Student groups formed the Beijing University Student Autonomous Federation, demanding that the government engage in dialogue and retract the April 26 editorial. However, the government refused to change its stance on the turmoil, leading to a stalemate. The April 26 editorial is thus considered a pivotal moment, leading to the use of force to suppress the protests. We do not want to run our government. We simply want to engage in discussions with the government. I believe they genuinely desire a phase of involvement in government policymaking. Many people in the region are members of the Communist Party. They are not there just for the sake of it. They are there to engage with the government. On May 4th, marking the 70th anniversary of the May 4th movement, more citizens, workers, and even officials from state agencies and media personnel joined the cause. At that time, the then General Secretary of the Communist Party, Zhao Ziyang, delivered a speech on the May 4th movement. He acknowledged the students' patriotic fervor and urged them to resolve issues through negotiation and dialogue within the framework of democracy and the rule of law. Zhao Ziyang was once considered a progressive within the Communist Party. His speech comforted many students who decided to leave the square and return to their schools. However, at this point, differing opinions emerged among the students in Tiananmen Square. Student leaders like Wang Dan, Chai Ling, and Wu Keixi hoped that their fellow students would continue the protests. On May 13, several hundred students on the square decided to begin a hunger strike. I am a student representative from Peking University, Wang Danao. Today, we are conducting a hunger strike in Tiananmen Square. Our demands are as follows. We demand that the government promptly engage in dialogue with the representatives of Beijing's universities and quickly acknowledge that this student movement is a patriotic and democratic one. On May 15, Mikhail Gorbachev arrived in Beijing. This was the first visit by a high-ranking Soviet leader to China since the Sino-Soviet split in 1959. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of students and citizens were still gathered in Tiananmen Square. The welcoming ceremony for Gorbachev had to be moved to the airport, which was embarrassing for the Chinese government. On May 17, the fifth day of the hunger strike, many students collapsed from exhaustion, and countless citizens day and night rushed to the makeshift site to bring water and food. People from all walks of life in Beijing took to the streets to support the fasting students. By mid-May, the student protests had been ongoing for a month, reaching a stalemate. On May 18, Li Peng finally agreed to meet with the students at the Great Hall of the People. The student leader Wang Dan, who came directly from the hospital, interrupted Li Peng during the conversation, escalating the tension. I have made myself clear. They just left, and I have made myself clear. The students have certain demands, otherwise they would not have left. The talk yielded no substantial results, and both sides parted ways unhappily. We have already resorted to fasting. We demand that the government come and meet with us. When Li Peng came out to meet with us, he was incredibly arrogant. Moreover, this is not the key point. The purpose of our fasting is to engage in dialogue. But this was not a dialogue. It was a lecture. Therefore, in this situation, note that although I interrupted him and responded to his words, I was quite polite. In Zhao Ziyang's memoir Prisoner of State, he recorded his reflections on the June 4th incident. He believed that handling the student movement well would be beneficial for further reforms. However, Zhao Ziyang failed to persuade the students to withdraw from the square. On May 20th, the Beijing government declared martial law. Nevertheless, the demonstrations and protests in the square and on the streets of Beijing did not cease. Beijing students, commemorating the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, called for a global alliance of Chinese people to march in solidarity, marking the beginning of an unprecedented global show of support. The beleaguered students were once again inspired. In the following days, Tiananmen Square seemed like a free island, enjoying a brief respite of free speech. On May 30th, at dawn, a statue symbolizing freedom, the goddess of democracy, was erected in Tiananmen Square. It stood facing the portrait of Mao Zedong on Tiananmen Gate, just a few dozen meters away. On June 3rd at around 9:50 p.m., the Beijing municipal government and the Martial Law Command jointly issued an emergency announcement. They urged Beijing residents to stay indoors, avoid going out, and refrain from going to Tiananmen Square to ensure their safety. However, the public was unaware that at that moment, hundreds of thousands of troops, tanks, and armored vehicles were assembled in the outskirts of Beijing, ready to move in and clear the square at any time. Over 200,000 martial law troops advanced towards Tiananmen Square from various directions. Soldiers were shot at by protesting students and citizens along the way, and gunshots echoed through Beijing throughout the night. In the early hours of June 4th, the military occupied Tiananmen Square, and the clearance began. The goddess of democracy statue was toppled, and the June 4th movement failed. The exact number of casualties in this violent crackdown remains a mystery. According to incomplete civilian estimates, hundreds to thousands of people died during the suppression from the night of June 3 to the early morning of June 4. In November 1989, the Berlin Wall, symbolizing the Cold War between the East and West, fell. Decades have passed, but the pursuit of the truth about June 4th and accountability for the crackdown has never ceased. Some argue that opening fire on the people during June 4th completely undermined the legitimacy of the Communist Party's rule, missing a crucial opportunity for the party to proactively achieve political modernization. The world witnessed the Chinese government's bloody suppression of its people through media coverage. After 1989, political reform stagnated, and political participation and democratization became even more distant. Others believe that the suppression brought stability to Chinese society, a necessary price for economic development and maintaining the regime. In the aftermath, President George H.W. Bush denounced the actions in Tiananmen Square and suspended military sales as well as high-level exchanges with Chinese officials. Many members of the U.S. Congress, the American public, and international leaders advocated broader economic sanctions, some of which were implemented. U.S. leaders met with Chinese nationals studying in the United States as a symbolic gesture of commitment. Questions of relations with China, in particular the granting of most favored nation trading status, were controversial questions for the remainder of President Bush's term and into the term of President Bill Clinton.